Racist cop shaved a black woman's head in court, then froze when she took the bench. Why would a police officer forcibly shave a black female judge's head in a courthouse hallway just before trial? She took the bench moments later, stunning her attacker. But the truly shocking twist is discovering the assault was ordered by the corrupt sheriff himself to stop her from exposing his criminal network. Subscribe, like, and listen now to hear this powerful story of courage and justice. The buzzing was viciously loud in the confines of the small security office. Vibrating through the cold metal chair Judge Celeste Monroe was shoved into. Two county sheriff's deputies held her arms pinned, their faces impassive, avoiding her eyes. Before them stood Officer Victor Kane, his face a mask of smug authority, wielding a humming electric clipper like a weapon. Just enforcing departmental grooming standards, Judge, Kane sneered, his breath hot and stale near her ear. Sheriff's orders. Can't have. Contraband. Hidden in all that hair. He yanked roughly at one of Celeste's meticulously braided locks, a style she wore with pride, a symbol of her identity. Celeste clenched her jaw, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear, though her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't about grooming standards. It was a calculated, brutal act of humiliation. She'd been intercepted near the courthouse security checkpoint, steered into this windowless room under the flimsy pretext of a private security matter. The clippers bit into her hair, shearing through years of growth close to her scalp. Locks fell around her shoulders, onto the dusty floor, like severed pieces of her dignity. Kane worked quickly, crudely, scraping the buzzing blade against her skin. Celeste squeezed her eyes shut, focusing on her breathing, summoning every ounce of judicial composure she possessed. She would not break. Not here. Not for him. He finished, the buzzing finally cutting out, leaving a ringing silence. Kane stepped back, admiring his handiwork with a cruel chuckle. There now. Much neater. More. Professional. Wouldn't want anyone thinking you're above the rules. Right, Judge? He tossed the clippers onto a nearby table with a clatter. Now you look presentable for court. He signaled the deputies, who released her abruptly. Celeste stood on shaky legs, raising trembling hands to her now bare scalp. The violation felt profound, searing. Kane watched her, his eyes filled with undisguised contempt. Don't forget who runs things around here, he added, his voice low and menacing, before turning and swaggering out of the room, leaving Celeste alone amidst the shorn fragments of her identity, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and malice. Judge Celeste Monroe, at 38, was a force in the Fulton County Superior Court system. Known for her razor-sharp legal mind, meticulous preparation, and unwavering commitment to fairness, she had risen rapidly, becoming one of the youngest judges appointed to the bench in recent Atlanta history. Her presence was particularly significant as a black woman navigating a system still grappling with deep-seated biases and entrenched power structures. Her chambers were filled with legal texts and photos of her family. Her reputation was built on integrity, often issuing rulings that, while legally sound, sometimes challenged the status quo or ruffled feathers within law enforcement. Her carefully maintained locks were more than just a hairstyle. They were a connection to her heritage and a quiet statement of self-possession in corridors of power where conformity was often expected. She had worked tirelessly, overcoming financial hardship and subtle prejudices throughout law school and her early career as a prosecutor, driven by a fierce belief in justice tempered by a pragmatic understanding of the system's flaws. The system in Atlanta, like many major cities, was complex. While progressive voices called for reform, powerful figures like County Sheriff Malcolm Reed represented the old guard. Reed, a charismatic but iron-fisted politician, ran his department with fierce loyalty demanded from his deputies, often dismissing or burying complaints of misconduct, particularly those involving racial bias. Officer Victor Kane, a veteran with a checkered history of excessive force complaints that mysteriously vanished from his record, was known as one of Reed's loyal enforcers, embodying the aggressive, often prejudiced, policing style Reed seemed to condone. Judge Monroe had crossed paths with Reed's department numerous times in her courtroom. She had suppressed evidence obtained through questionable searches, called out procedural errors in cases brought by officers like Kane, and presided over civil suits alleging misconduct by deputies under Reed's command. Her rulings were always strictly based on the law, but they undoubtedly irritated the sheriff, who saw her as an obstacle, a symbol of a changing tide he resisted. Celeste wasn't naive. She had felt the subtle chill from certain courtroom deputies, overheard dismissive comments, sensed the undercurrent of resentment. Her close friend, Clara Evans, a fiery civil rights attorney who frequently battled Reed's department in court, had warned her, "Celeste, be careful. Reed doesn't like judges he can't control, especially not judges who look like you." Celeste, however, refused to be intimidated. Her commitment was to the law, applied equally, without fear or favor. She believed in the power of the institution, even while recognizing its imperfections. She prepared for court each day with diligence, armed with precedents and statutes, believing her position, her robe, offered a shield, allowing her to uphold justice within the very halls where prejudice sometimes lurked. She hadn't anticipated, however, that the attack, when it came, would be so personal, so brutal, stripping away the symbols of her identity under the guise of enforcing non-existent rules, a blatant act of intimidation right within the supposed sanctuary of the courthouse itself. The morning of the assault began like any other demanding day on the bench. Judge Monroe was scheduled to preside over a high-profile, aggravated assault trial. Key to the prosecution's case was the testimony of the arresting officer, Victor Kane. Celeste reviewed the case files meticulously, noting potential issues with witness identification procedures, preparing for a day of rigorous legal arguments. As she approached the main security checkpoint leading to the restricted courthouse corridors, Officer Kane, flanked by two other deputies Celeste didn't recognize, intercepted her. "Judge Monroe," Kane said, his tone falsely polite but his eyes hard. "Sheriff Reed asked us to have a word with you regarding a potential security concern. Protocol requires a private discussion." Celeste frowned. This was highly irregular. Security concerns were typically handled by court marshals or her own bailiff, not line officers under Reed's command, especially not just before a trial where one was a key witness. "Officer Kane, any security matter can be discussed through official channels or with my bailiff present," she stated firmly. "I have a trial commencing shortly." "This won't take long, Judge," Kane insisted, gesturing toward a small, windowless administrative office nearby, often used for witness sequestration or brief security screenings. Sheriff's direct request. The two deputies moved subtly, blocking her path back towards the main hallway. Recognizing the implicit coercion and not wanting to cause a scene in the public corridor, Celeste reluctantly complied, assuming it was some bureaucratic overreach or perhaps a clumsy attempt at intimidation related to the upcoming trial. "Very well, officer. Make it brief." Inside the small room, the door clicked shut behind them. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Kane dropped the pretense of politeness. "Sheriff's got concerns, Judge, about things being hidden. Contraband. Says we need to check. Thoroughly." His gaze flickered meaningfully toward her locks. Celeste stared at him, incredulous, then furious. Are you suggesting I, as sitting judge, am concealing contraband in my hair? This is outrageous, officer. Get the chief judge down here immediately. Can't do that, Judge, Kane sneered. He nodded to the deputies. Sheriff wants this handled discreetly. Compliance check. Before Celeste could react further, the deputies seized her arms, forcing her into the chair. Kane produced the buzzing electric clippers. The swift, brutal act of shaving her head followed the hook scene. Left alone in the room moments later, the sound of the clippers still echoing, Celeste touched her strangely bare scalp. The shock was physical, visceral. Humiliation washed over her, hot and stinging, followed by a wave of icy rage that burned away the initial disbelief. This wasn't just Kane. This was Reed. This was a calculated assault designed to break her spirit, to intimidate her into silence or resignation. But they had underestimated Celeste Monroe. Years of fighting subtle and overt prejudice had forged steel in her spine. The violation, intended to diminish her, instead ignited a powerful resolve. She would not be broken. She found her emergency scarf in her briefcase, wrapped it deliberately around her head, took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed her robes, and pushed open the door. Her initial goal was immediate and unwavering. Walk into that courtroom, take her seat on the bench, preside over the case with absolute professionalism, and ensure that Victor Kane and Malcolm Reed faced the full consequences of their barbaric actions. Her first step was the long, impossibly difficult walk down the corridor to her courtroom, head held high, knowing Kane would be there, waiting to testify, expecting her to be shattered. He was about to be profoundly mistaken. The walk to the courtroom felt like miles, each footstep echoing Celeste's internal tremor, yet her outward posture remained erect, her gaze fixed straight ahead. As she entered courtroom 3B, a low murmur rippled through the assembled lawyers, defendants, court staff, and observers. They saw the scarf hastily tied around her head, a stark contrast to the familiar, intricate style she usually wore. Eyes widened, whispers exchanged. Celeste walked directly to the bench, ignoring the stares, the palpable tension. She ascended the dais, settled into her high-backed chair, and looked out over the courtroom. Her eyes deliberately found Victor Kane, standing near the prosecution table, ready to be called as their first witness. For a fraction of a second, his smug confidence faltered. He saw the scarf, saw her on the bench, and a flicker of disbelief, then perhaps fear, crossed his face before he schooled his features back into a neutral mask. He hadn't expected her to appear, certainly not like this, seemingly composed. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, his voice slightly strained. Celeste called the court to order, her voice clear, steady, betraying none of the turmoil beneath the surface. Case number SAR 25-887, State v. Johnson. Are both sides ready to proceed? The trial began. Celeste presided with meticulous professionalism, ruling on objections, listening to opening statements, her focus absolute. Yet beneath the calm facade, her mind worked furiously. During the first brief recess, sequestered in her chambers, she made 2 urgent, encrypted calls on her personal cell phone. The first was to Chief Judge Abernathy, a respected elder jurist. Celeste reported the assault by Kane, explicitly stating Kane claimed to be acting on Sheriff Reed's orders. She requested an immediate, formal investigation and demanded Kane be removed from the courthouse pending its outcome. Judge Abernathy, shocked and appalled, promised swift action but cautioned about the political complexities involving the powerful sheriff's office. The second call was to Clara Evans. "Clara, it happened," Celeste said, her voice finally trembling slightly. "Kane, under Reed's orders. They shaved my head in a security office. She quickly recounted the events. Clara gasped, then swore, her voice tight with fury. Celeste, are you okay? What do you need? I need you to investigate Reed's network, Celeste instructed. This wasn't just about me. Kane felt untouchable. Reed ordered it. There's something bigger here. Find it. The first complication arose almost immediately. When court reconvened, Kane was still present. Judge Abernathy, facing procedural hurdles and likely pressure from Reed's allies, hadn't been able to remove him instantly. Celeste was forced to preside over a trial where her own assailant was a key witness. She maintained impartiality, but the situation was fraught. News of the incident, initially suppressed, began leaking out, likely fueled by courthouse staff who witnessed Celeste before and after. Cell phone photos of her entering the courtroom with the scarf appeared online. Justice for Judge Monroe started trending locally. Public pressure mounted, but so did the pushback. The police union issued a statement defending Kane, citing protocol and accusing the judge of interfering with a security matter. Reed publicly denied ordering the assault, painting Kane as perhaps overzealous but acting within vague departmental guidelines, promising an internal review. Clara Evans began her investigation, discreetly contacting former clients who had filed complaints against Kane or Reed's department, searching for patterns, looking for whistleblowers. She quickly hit walls of silence, fear, and official obstruction. Records were missing. Potential witnesses were intimidated or unwilling to talk. It became clear that Reed's network was adept at burying dissent and protecting its own. Celeste realized that achieving justice for her own assault required dismantling the very system that enabled it, a far more complex and dangerous undertaking than she initially anticipated. Days turned into a week. The trial Celeste was presiding over continued under immense strain. Kane testified, his demeanor outwardly professional. But Celeste felt the undercurrent of his insolence, his confidence that he remained untouchable. The internal investigation into the assault crawled along, mired in bureaucracy and veiled resistance orchestrated by Reed's allies. Public attention flared, then began to fade, threatening to become just another unresolved incident in a troubled system. Celeste felt increasingly isolated, the weight of the assault and the fight ahead pressing down on her. Clara Evans, however, was relentless. Following a faint trail from an old, dismissed lawsuit, she located Marcus Jones, a former deputy who had resigned from Reed's department under pressure 5 years earlier. Jones had initially filed a complaint alleging retaliation after reporting misconduct by fellow officers. But his complaint vanished, and he was subtly forced out. Trust was difficult to build. Jones was wary, fearing further retribution. But Clara persisted, appealing to his conscience, sharing details of the assault on Judge Monroe as evidence of the ongoing pattern. Finally, Jones agreed to talk, off the record, providing Clara with a crucial piece of the puzzle. He confirmed Reed ran an informal but effective system of patronage and protection. Officers loyal to Reed, especially those willing to enforce his often politically motivated or biased directives, like Kane, had their misconduct complaints quietly buried by specific individuals within internal affairs loyal to Reed. In return, these officers received favorable assignments, promotions, and tacit approval for aggressive tactics, particularly in minority communities. Jones named names specific IA officers, other deputies involved in known incidents that were never properly investigated. He also mentioned rumors of Reed using slush funds or off-book accounts to reward loyalty or silence critics. Armed with this inside information, Clara cross-referenced it with court records and public documents. She found correlations. Cases dismissed under questionable circumstances involving Reed's favored officers, unusually lenient internal disciplinary actions, patterns of complaints disappearing. She also discovered financial links, indirect donations, to Reed's political campaigns from businesses owned by relatives of officers who benefited from buried complaints. Clara presented her findings to Celeste. It wasn't just about protecting bad cops. It was a systemic operation involving potential financial corruption tied directly to Reed's power base. This was the turning point. Celeste realized the assault on her wasn't merely an act of racist intimidation aimed at silencing one judge. It was an attack designed to protect a deeply embedded, potentially criminal enterprise. Reed hadn't just ordered Kane to humiliate her. He likely saw her as a direct threat to his entire corrupt structure because her rulings challenged the impunity his network relied on. The scope of the fight shifted dramatically. This was bigger than Victor Kane, bigger than her personal violation. It was about rooting out systemic corruption that poisoned the very institution she served. Her goal transformed from seeking personal justice and Kane's conviction to exposing Sheriff Malcolm Reed and his entire network. Point of no return. Celeste knew this path was perilous. Reed had immense political power, loyalists throughout the system, and a demonstrated willingness to act ruthlessly. But she also knew she couldn't back down. She instructed Clara to focus the investigation entirely on building an airtight case against Reed himself, using the information from Marcus Jones as a roadmap. They would need incontrovertible proof, financial records, corroborating testimony, anything to pierce Reed's shield of plausible deniability. Celeste decided to leverage her position strategically, using upcoming cases involving Reed's known associates to apply legal pressure and perhaps uncover further evidence, all while maintaining a facade of judicial routine. The fight had escalated into a high-stakes battle for the soul of the justice system itself. The decision to target Sheriff Reed directly required immense strategic care. Celeste and Clara knew they were confronting a powerful, entrenched figure who wouldn't hesitate to retaliate viciously if he felt truly threatened. Their immediate priority was gathering concrete evidence of Reed's direct involvement in the corruption, particularly the alleged bribery and burying of complaints. Clara Evans focused on the leads provided by the former deputy, Marcus Jones. She painstakingly tracked down individuals who had filed complaints against Kane and other officers identified by Jones, cases that had mysteriously disappeared. Many were initially terrified to speak, fearing reprisal. Clara spent weeks building trust, meeting them discreetly, offering pro bono legal support for potential civil suits, gradually convincing a few brave souls to provide sworn affidavits detailing their original complaints and the subsequent lack of action or perceived intimidation by Reed's department. She also worked with a forensic accountant to trace the financial links. She'd uncovered the campaign donations, the potential slush funds. This proved challenging, as Reed was adept at using layers of intermediaries and opaque business dealings. Progress was slow, incremental. Celeste, meanwhile, walked a tightrope on the bench. She couldn't appear biased, but she could demand meticulous adherence to procedure in cases involving Reed's deputies. She scrutinized warrants, challenged witness testimony inconsistencies, and issued narrow, legally precise rulings that, while fair, often hampered the prosecution in cases built on shaky ground by Reed's favored officers. This subtle, persistent pressure began to create friction within the department and the DA's office, drawing attention to patterns of potentially problematic policing. Reed reacted predictably. Unable to attack Celeste directly through official channels without appearing retaliatory, especially given the public scrutiny after the assault, he resorted to insidious tactics. Anonymous, damaging rumors about Celeste's personal life began appearing on fringe blogs. Her car was vandalized outside her home. She received veiled threats through third parties. The pressure was immense, designed to isolate her, exhaust her, force her to make a mistake or simply resign. Internally, Celeste battled moments of doubt and fear. The isolation was real. Some colleagues kept their distance, fearing association. The constant vigilance was exhausting. Was she putting herself and Clara in too much danger? Was Reed too powerful to challenge? She drew strength from her commitment to justice, from the support of Clara, and from the quiet dignity of the victims Clara was finding, whose stories mirrored the injustice she herself had faced. She also found unexpected support online. The Justice for Judge Monroe hashtag evolving into a broader movement demanding accountability from Reed's department, fueled by Clara discreetly leaking anonymized details of the buried complaints. A significant development occurred when Marcus Jones, the whistleblower deputy, emboldened by Celeste's persistence and Clara's dedication, agreed to provide more direct help. He still feared going public, but provided Clara with specific details about Reed's communication methods: burner phones, encrypted apps, face-to-face meetings at specific locations. He also recalled hearing Reed brag about having Officer Kane handle difficult situations because Kane knew how to deliver a message without leaving paperwork. While not direct proof of the order to assault Celeste, it corroborated Kane's role as Reed's enforcer. Jones also provided a crucial piece: the name of a specific internal affairs officer known to be Reed's primary gatekeeper for burying complaints. This gave Clara a new, specific target for her investigation into the cover-up mechanism. The net around Reed was slowly, painstakingly tightening. Clara Evans zeroed in on the internal affairs officer identified by Marcus Jones, Lieutenant Davis. Digging into Davis's finances, Clara and the forensic accountant found inconsistencies, unexplained deposits, assets disproportionate to his salary. Cross-referencing dates with buried complaints involving Reed's favored officers revealed a damning correlation. Davis appeared to be the linchpin in Reed's system, likely receiving kickbacks for making complaints disappear. Armed with this potential leverage, Clara arranged, through intermediaries, a carefully orchestrated accidental encounter with Davis, perhaps catching him off guard at a police union event or function. Hinting subtly at the financial evidence she possessed without revealing everything, Clara applied pressure, suggesting his cooperation regarding Sheriff Reed's directives could significantly mitigate his own exposure. Davis, initially hostile, became visibly unnerved. Simultaneously, Reed, feeling the heat from Celeste's persistent judicial scrutiny and Clara's investigation, details of which likely reached him through his network, grew desperate. He needed to remove Celeste from the bench definitively. His allies filed a formal, aggressive motion demanding Judge Monroe's recusal from all criminal cases, citing not just the assault incident, but also the biased pattern of her recent rulings against his department and her known association with civil rights attorney Clara Evans. It was a direct assault on her judicial authority, designed to cripple her ability to influence the system. This recusal hearing became the focal point, the arena where the conflict would likely culminate. Celeste knew losing this motion would be a devastating blow, effectively sidelining her. She and Clara prepared meticulously, anticipating every argument. They planned to use the hearing not just to defend Celeste's impartiality, but to expose the reason Reed wanted her recused, her threat to his corrupt operation. The final piece of evidence arrived just days before the hearing. Marcus Jones, the whistleblower, contacted Clara, his voice trembling. He had managed to retrieve a fragment of audio from a burner phone Reed had carelessly discarded a phone Jones knew Reed used for sensitive communications. The audio quality was poor, fragmented, but contained Reed's voice giving instructions that, while not explicitly mentioning shaving Celeste's head, clearly ordered Kane to intercept Judge Monroe before court, rattle her cage, and make sure she understands who's really in charge. Coupled with Kane's known actions, it was powerful corroboration of Reed's direct order for intimidation and potentially assault. Dark night. The night before the recusal hearing, Celeste sat alone in her chambers, the weight of the impending confrontation immense. The audio fragment was strong, but not a perfect confession. Davis hadn't flipped yet. Reed was powerful, connected. Could they truly win? She touched her short hair, now worn as a symbol of defiance. She thought of the victims Clara had found, their hope rekindled. She thought of her oath to uphold the law. Failure wasn't an option. She finalized her strategy with Clara, preparing to lay everything on the line in that courtroom. Knowing this hearing wasn't just about her career, it was about the possibility of justice itself in a system fighting to protect its own corruption. The courtroom buzzed with intention far exceeding a typical recusal hearing. Reporters packed the gallery. Sheriff Reed sat stonily beside his lawyer, projecting confidence, while Victor Kane watched from the back, his own trial pending. Celeste, composed and robed, sat beside Clara Evans, who acted as her counsel for this specific motion. Reed's lawyer argued forcefully, presenting statistics on Celeste's recent rulings, quoting anonymous sources questioning her impartiality, emphasizing the appearance of bias due to the assault. He painted Reed as a victim of a politically motivated judge. Clara Evans then rose to respond. She systematically dismantled the claims of judicial bias, citing legal precedent and Celeste's meticulously documented reasoning in each questioned ruling. She argued the assault wasn't grounds for recusal, but rather evidence of an attempt to intimidate the judiciary. Then she went on the offensive. "Your Honor," Clara addressed the presiding chief, Judge Abernathy, "this motion isn't about Judge Monroe's impartiality. It's about Sheriff Reed attempting to silence a judge who threatens his corrupt practices." Over strenuous objections from Reed's lawyer, Clara presented a summary of her findings. The pattern of buried complaints against Reed's favored officers, the financial anomalies surrounding Lieutenant Davis in internal affairs, the testimony from victims finally willing to speak out. Then came the audio fragment. Clara played the recording recovered by Marcus Jones. Reed's voice, though distorted, was recognizable, instructing Kane to intercept Judge Monroe. "Rattle her cage. Make sure she understands who's really in charge." A gasp went through the courtroom. Reed leaped to his feet, shouting, "That's taken out of context. Illegal recording." "The legality has been verified, Sheriff," Clara stated coolly. "And the context seems quite clear." Before Reed's lawyer could recover, Chief Judge Abernathy, his face grim, spoke. "Based on the evidence presented regarding serious allegations of systemic corruption, witness tampering, and potential conspiracy originating from the sheriff's office, directed specifically at a sitting judge of this court, this motion for recusal is emphatically denied." He then turned to the courtroom deputies. "Sheriff Reed, Lieutenant Davis, Officer Kane, you will remain. Federal investigators have been notified and are en route." Pandemonium erupted. Reed stared in disbelief as federal agents, who had discreetly entered the courtroom, approached him and Davis. Kim was also detained again. The attempt to silence Celeste had backfired spectacularly, triggering the public dismantling of Reed's corrupt empire within the very halls of justice he sought to control. Celeste watched, not with triumph, but with the somber satisfaction of justice finally beginning its work. The federal investigation, triggered by the disastrous recusal hearing, ripped through the Fulton County Sheriff's Department and parts of the court system. Armed with Clara Evans' meticulous research, the whistleblower's testimony, and evidence seized following the arrests, prosecutors built an airtight case. Sheriff Malcolm Reed was convicted on multiple counts of corruption, racketeering, and obstruction of justice, receiving a lengthy federal prison sentence that dismantled his network of influence. Lieutenant Davis also faced charges for his role in the cover-ups. Victor Kane was convicted both for the initial assault on Celeste and for his part in the broader conspiracy. The scandal forced significant reforms within the Sheriff's Department and the court's administrative procedures, including enhanced oversight of internal affairs, stricter protocols for handling citizen complaints, and mandatory bias training. The cases previously buried under Reed's tenure were reopened, leading to justice for numerous victims whose voices have been silenced. Judge Celeste Monroe became a powerful symbol of judicial integrity and courage. She continued to preside over her court with fairness and distinction, her short hair a quiet testament to her resilience. The assault, intended to diminish her, had instead amplified her voice and impact. Working with Clara Evans, she established the Justice Rising Foundation, funded initially by anonymous donors inspired by her story. The foundation provided legal aid to victims of civil rights abuses within the justice system, advocated for police and judicial reform, and supported initiatives promoting diversity on the bench and in law enforcement. Months later, Celeste stood before a group of law students, sharing her story not as a victim, but as a survivor who fought back against a corrupt system from within. She spoke of the importance of ethics, courage, and upholding the law even when facing immense pressure. Afterward, Clara joined her. "They tried to take your crown," Clara said quietly, referencing Celeste's locks. Celeste smiled, touching her short hair. "They took my hair," she replied, "but they couldn't take my gavel, and they couldn't silence justice." Her journey, born from a moment of brutal violation, had affirmed her purpose, strengthened her resolve, and ultimately helped reshape the very system she served.